welcome to Women Lifting Women podcast, a podcast dedicated to female voices in leadership in tech. I'm Miraz, and I'm joined here today by Rachel, which I'm very excited for. Rachel, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much for inviting me to join the podcast, Emma. My name is Rachel Smith. I am the CEO and co-founder of ExchangeWire. ExchangeWire is a B2B industry publication for the marketing and advertising technology business. Hopefully many of your listeners will be familiar with who ExchangeWire is. And we cover everything from the very sort of gritty detail behind executing marketing and advertising campaigns from a technology point of view, right through to the more strategic challenges facing the modern marketing and advertising industry.
I'm certain everyone will know like ExchangeWire, and we work with ExchangeWire. I'm sure everyone will be very familiar. So I have no doubt that it will be a very well-known reference, basically. In a wonderful publication, and it's been a pleasure to working with you so far, and I'm really excited to have you on board and kind of get us started with my favorite question, which is, what is the advantage of being a woman in this industry or role as a CEO, which you don't see that many women, unfortunately, taking that role?
Yes, so you're right. It does feel very often, particularly on the technology side of the advertising and marketing industry, as though you don't see very many women in the CEO role. That's because, that is the case. I think that is probably twofold. The first is that when you're looking at technology businesses and technology companies, you tend to see less women in the CEO role than you do men. We all know that particular issue is being tackled from much more of a grassroots level these days, encouraging women to go into certain studies and specialising in particular fields that will give them a good range of skills and experience to rise up through the ranks in technology companies. So I often find myself as a bit of a minority as a CEO in this industry, but I don't think I'm in the minority as a CEO of a media business or of a small business. I think there's plenty of women that run media businesses. There's plenty of women who run small businesses and therefore take on those chief executive responsibilities. And that would probably bring me to the thing that I think that is the biggest advantage of being a CEO, and then also of being a female CEO, is that you are, I would argue that being the CEO is the best job that you can have in a business. I understand it's not everyone's ambition, but there is nothing quite like being able to run the business the way that you see fit. Again, that's not to say that you're performing your job and your role in isolation. You're not at all. But it's a real opportunity to flex your leadership skills and your leadership style. And being right at the top of the business gives you so much visibility into everything else that's going on in the business. It gives you a lot of visibility into other businesses in the industry. And it gives you the opportunity to be really creative and to flex your leadership ambitions. And it's the best job that you can have, in my opinion. The advantage of being a woman in that job is that, and I'm going to slip into some slightly stereotypical topics here. I do think that women are predisposed to being quite good at multitasking and looking at a range of things at the same time and being able to spin many plates at once. And that is a real advantage when you're a CEO. You need to have a read across so many different parts of the business and have some understanding and or expertise in so many different fields. It really helps to be somebody that can cope with that level of diversity. The second thing is that, again, slipping into slightly stereotypical territory here, I do think women are also predisposed to slightly more empathetic styles of leadership, and that is a huge advantage when you are running an organisation with a range of personalities, a range of intellectual capabilities and specialisms, and a range of needs. And that's just not just the people that are working with you, that's also your client base and your customer base. And I think that women have got also a life experience that enables them to see those responsibilities through a different lens. And I personally think that's an advantage.
I mean, I think that's exactly why I wanted to ask this question. It's just reminding ourselves what women can do and what do we bring to the table. And that makes it actually maybe even easier. And where do we outperform? So we don't think, oh, like, you know what? We're always the underdog. We're always like it's always harder for us. I mean, there are things we just do better. And that's kind of a reminder of where we actually have maybe the upper hand or can do things better in our own unique way. And that's both okay and actually really encouraged. And I think that's that's why it's my favorite question. But you mentioned something really powerful about flexing your leadership muscles. And since that's going to really pivot, it's a great pivot to my question about the pivotal moment in your career that really define your path to leadership and how you ended up as a CEO and what brought you here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because definitely the answer to that is linked to the answer to my first question. So prior to working with ExchangeWire, co-founding ExchangeWire with my Chief Strategy Officer, Kieran O'Kane, who's very well known in the industry, prior to that, I didn't work in the media business at all. I had some experience in running and managing communications and media teams, but my area of expertise and my studies had sent me off on a career path in the public sector. And so I worked in a lot of public policy roles. I worked with politicians, and then I also worked with public service organisations that delivered frontline public services. And in London, I worked in local authorities, and I worked in central policy units within those organisations. So at the time, I was working in, the lead up to my pivotal moment that took me to where I am now. I was working at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. So all Londoners will know this local authority, not for just being a famous neighbourhood, but for also being, very unfortunately, at the forefront of some terrible controversies associated with delivering public services, namely a social housing disaster that happened several years ago at Grenfell Tower, which resulted in a fire, killing a lot of people that lived in that social housing estate. That was a really good example. There's nothing good about that set of circumstances, obviously, but it was a really good example of how things can go horribly wrong with leadership within public services or any large organisation, but public services in particular, because if we think about the difference between public sector organisations and private sector organisations are designed to make profit and to sell more products. Public sector organisations are designed to spend public money wisely, get the best value for money out of the services that need to be delivered. And that was always at the forefront of every public sector organisation I worked in. So this is well before the days of Grenfell. I was working in that organisation. I was feeling under-challenged in my role. I was quite ambitious. I wanted to work elsewhere. I wanted to get a promotion. But it was a very nice organisation to work in, and people didn't leave very often. So getting promoted through the ranks was quite difficult. You had to wait for people who were in a more senior role above you to leave. Yeah. So I started to look for alternative jobs elsewhere. And I was in the interview process for a really exciting job that I wanted to get, where I would be working side by side with the chief executive in another public sector organisation. I would be the chief of staff in that role. And I hadn't at that stage been offered the job. I didn't know this, but the people that were interviewing me had gone out for references, and they had spoken with my existing boss, who had then spoken with the chief executive of that organisation, Kensington and Chelsea Council. I didn't know any of this, and I was on my way back from lunch break one day, and I bumped into the chief executive, who I knew but not well. This is a large organisation, remember, 3,500 to 5,000 people they employed. Bumped into him on the stairs, and he said, "Oh, hello, Rachel, nice to see you. I got a phone call today from someone who wants to give you a job." And I sort of froze, because I thought, oh God, I hadn't even been offered the job at that stage. I'd gone through the interview process, and I froze, and I thought, what do I say here? And he obviously saw the look on my face and he said, don't be concerned. We had a very positive conversation and I'd like to give you some career advice. If you've got a minute, come into my office. So I did. I went and I sat down and he said to me something I've just said in the answer to the first question, which is the chief executive's job is the best job to have in any organisation. So my advice to you is that you should aim higher than you think you're capable of. Even if your ambition is not to become the chief executive, don't limit yourself by thinking, oh, I'd just be happy if I get to this role, or I'd just be happy if I get that promotion, or I'd just be happy if I get that new and exciting job. And he said, the reason that you shouldn't limit yourself is because that will limit your own expectations of your abilities. It doesn't matter if you don't ultimately become the chief executive, but know that that's the best job to have and there's nothing stopping you from getting it. All you need to do is the work and work out what you're interested in. And he said the rest just follows from there. And that was such a pivotal moment for me because at the time I hadn't thought about becoming a chief executive. I was absolutely in the mindset that he described. I just wanted the next interesting job that was a step on from where I was, that was a promotion from where I currently was. And I wasn't thinking beyond that. And we then went into a bit more detailed conversation about, leadership styles, capabilities, what my own personal interests might be. But the thing that stuck with me in that conversation was him saying, you want the chief executive's job because it's the best job to have and don't limit your own beliefs in yourself. And I thought that's a piece of advice that actually everyone could do with hearing, because the only thing that stops us from the next opportunity or the next step, majority of the time, obviously there might be some practical hurdles in the way, but once you overcome those practical hurdles, the only thing that stops us is our own limiting beliefs. And it completely changed my life and my career prospects.
I love it. And I think maybe I needed to hear it myself. I don't know. There was something about it. I felt like, oh my God, this is such a good advice and an important advice to hear. And I felt like I just froze and I went, oh shit. This is such an important piece of information, and yeah, that's very valid.
It's true, right?
Yeah, I think you might have changed my life too. All around.
So I'll need to give the credit. There's no way that he'll be listening. You never know, though. I need to give the credit to this man. His name was Derek Myers. He was the chief executive of Kensington and Chelsea Council at the time. He retired probably a year or two after that. And then, as we know, as I mentioned earlier on, the organisation descended into a bit of a leadership vortex and resulted in some terrible catastrophic consequences. Prior to that, though, he was a remarkable leader. He was highly qualified for his job. He had worked in the public services for about 35, 40 years at that stage, and he'd started his career at entry level. He was a social worker. He used to see people day in and day out and help them with the most difficult, issues in their lives. Yeah. And he really understood how to support people with vulnerabilities, and he'd worked his way up through various organisations, eventually becoming a chief executive. What I appreciated about him, as every leader, he was divisive among staff. Some people thought he was great. Some people didn't think he was great. What I appreciated about him was that he took the time to have that conversation with me. I was one person in an organisation of 3,500 to 5,000 people. It was a serendipitous moment. We bumped into each other. I was on his mind because my boss had mentioned me to him and someone had phoned him about me for a reference, but he didn't need to do any of those things. So shout out to Derek Myers. He changed my career path and my life, and hopefully this advice will change, like you said, Emma, lots of other people's perspectives on themselves and their own skills and abilities.
I'm actually going to jump to a later question because I think this is a really important kind of segue of because we're talking about this pivotal moment and his decision to help you or to take the time to speak to you. And I think that's really something what I wanted to ask, what is the role of allyship? What is the role of men in promoting better representation and leadership role? Because in the end of the day, majority, not in all organizations, not in all industries, but we have a lot of basically men in the top still. What role they should play in terms of better representation, which maybe sound counterintuitive to some.
I think that's a really good question. It's very pertinent because it's at the forefront of everyone's minds. I think particularly in the advertising and marketing technology industry, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, there's still a bit of a lack of representation of women in the very senior roles, and that varies depending on which corner of the industry we're talking about. More of a challenge in technology businesses, less of a challenge in agencies and brands and publishers. But the fact that it still exists and we're still very much focused on it tells us that there's a lot more that we need to do. And I think, Emma, to your question, what men need to do is exactly what Derek Myers did with me that day. It is when you have the opportunity, when you see talent, you spot talent, you have the opportunity to contribute to someone's understanding of their position and role within an organisation, take it. Even if it's just a 10-minute conversation when you bump into one another in the lift or in the corridor or at an event. Sometimes it needs to be, we definitely need, a multi-pronged approach. There definitely needs to be something that's more deliberate as well. So organisations definitely need to be sitting down, looking at the profile of their entire business, looking at the profile of their leadership team, looking at the profile of those that are in more junior roles, what that talent, how that talent is currently performing, and how they can, how they can encourage that talent to rise up through the ranks, how they can put in place succession planning for the most senior people in the organisation to start to get more junior people interested in the concept of working towards achieving those roles and paying attention to the diversity of the profiles of people in those roles right from the very start. And I think that I think the example of that pivotal moment in my career also lends itself to one of the key things that I think we need to focus on more, which is breaking down the hierarchical barriers within organisations. As CEO myself, obviously of a small business, so I know this makes it a slightly different arrangement to a large business, but I want to be able to have a conversation with everyone in my business. I don't want people to think that they can't speak to me or come to me or bother me because I'm the CEO and maybe they're in a more junior entry level position. I want those ranks to be dissolved when it comes to conversations, when it comes to day-to-day interaction, and also when it comes to discussing business and strategic issues. It may be that people in junior positions without as much experience as others in the business don't necessarily see those strategic challenges and strategic goals through the same lens, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them about it. One of the things that we do in our business is quarterly updates with the staff to take them through exactly the strategic positioning of the business, including our revenue position, whether the news is good or bad. We try to bring everyone into at least a part of that conversation so that they can understand what challenges face the senior strategic leaders in the business. That helps them understand not just how the business is run and how the business operates, but what it might be like to be in the shoes of the people that are doing those jobs and what kind of day-to-day challenges might they focus on. So I think the more we expose those things within a business, the more we then break down the hierarchies and enable access to people within a business, and then the more that those that have got a particular role as potential allies, the more those people really focus on the small things that they can do and make a deliberate effort and a deliberate attempt to carry out those small tasks, the big difference will make. There's a really powerful saying that I think rings true for anyone that is trying to tackle diversity of any description in their organisation or in any corner of life, which is, if you can't see it, you can't be it. We all know that we need to see people in particular roles to understand that that's a possibility. But we also need to go beyond that and encourage people to see that, even when we don't have that present in our organisation. So, for example, if I was an ad tech company at the moment, a technology business, and I had a vacuum of female leadership in my organisation where there was underrepresentation, I would be looking at all tiers throughout that organisation and asking myself, can I see some, really interesting potential talent here? these people, these individuals might not be thinking that way. Let me go and have a chat with them and just ask them, what is it that you enjoy about your job? What are some of the things that you like about working for this business, working for this company? And then share your personal opinions. You should be telling people, I could see you in a leadership role one day. I can imagine you doing this task at a more senior level. I think you'd be really good at this. I think you'd be really good at that. 9 times out of 10, when you say that to people, particularly junior people within an organisation, they almost always don't really believe that is the case, that they've got the capability to do that. It's absolutely the case. Going back to my earlier point, we've all got the capability to achieve other things. We just need to believe that we can. We just need to stop limiting our own beliefs. And sometimes you need encouragement from other people to help with that.
I mean, I think that that's part of the big reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is not necessarily just sharing the stories of amplifying the voices of other women that achieved it, that have made it, in order to, like, you're not necessarily someone within the organization, but if you can see someone that they face some of the challenges, that you can see a part of yourself in them, and then basically see that they managed to make it out of the other side and have managed to rise beyond the current challenges that you're facing, it will help you believe that you can too. And I think that's a big part of how this podcast came into existence, and how the initiative of Women Lifting Women Come, what's the point of that entire initiative is kind of that. And I think that a lot of those decisions are less rational and more emotional, like the way that we buy things. And they're more like this emotive feeling that we get, oh yes, I believe this, like more than any other skill, more than a specific skill set. It's more like that, as you said, the faith in yourself. That really helps you power through that current barrier, whether it's an existing barrier, systematic barrier, and maybe a barrier within your own mindset in terms of what you can achieve and not achieve. But I think that's where also community can play a big part, which is another kind of like way of asking, what do you feel about community, and what part do you feel the community played within your career development, and if you felt like community was a part of it or not?
Yeah, I absolutely think community is a part of my own career development, the way that I like to build capability and confidence within my own organisation, and also what we're seeing more broadly in the advertising and marketing industry, and advertising and marketing tech industry too. So I think groups that enable people to build confidence and build capabilities are really important. So obviously, specifically focusing on programmatic media buying. At the moment, we've got fantastic, Women in Programmatic group, which has been set up by professionals and practitioners who work in programmatic roles within various organisations across the industry, whether that's on the tech side or the agency side or the publisher side. I think that's a fantastic practical example of bringing people together and helping to build support and capability, and also helping with people's professional development, giving people lots of practical skills and experience. So hosting events and running panel sessions, and so giving people some opportunity to participate in those, to practice their public speaking skills or their moderating skills or what have you, which I think is really good practical work. I think the other thing is that elevating the conversation in general around diversity, particularly gender balance, but also every other characteristic under the diversity banner, more broadly in the industry, has been really important. Something that at ExchangeWire we spearheaded in the industry in the very early days when we were running our annual AdTech conference, ATS, here in London and also in Singapore. This would be at least 10 years ago now, so around 2013, 2014, we started hosting a pre-event breakfast to focus on tackling diversity. And, we invited speakers from other organisations. We had the chief executive from Stonewall come and have a chat with everybody at that breakfast. That was a pre-ATS breakfast many years ago. And what was really interesting, she was able to share with us an outsider's perspective of the industry. She said one of the reasons she accepted the invitation to come and speak at the breakfast is because statistically at the time, the advertising and marketing industry had such poor representation across diversity characteristics that she felt, as the chief executive of a charitable organisation that's tasked with improving, chances for life chances for and representation for LGBTQ plus people, that she had a personal responsibility to go and raise the profile of that issue, try to represent, the sort of the priorities of some of the members of her organisation. And actually, I thought that was a great way to start elevating the conversation, professionalising it, making it an important pillar for all of us to think about and address in the industry. So I think that's another good example, connecting with other organisations outside the industry and encouraging those voices into the conversation. And then I think the final thing comes back to what you also do within your organisation. As a leader within an organisation, you have a responsibility to take these things seriously and to demonstrate how you take those things seriously. So you need to encourage a conversational community within your own organisation. Sometimes you're going to be part of that. Sometimes you're not going to be part of that. And that's right. You shouldn't be part of that because perhaps you're the leader in the organisation. Perhaps others in your business community within your organisation want to see change, and they want to be able to have private conversations or conversations without you in the room so that they can really flex their thinking about how they'd like to influence your organisation to change. And I think we've got to be open to all of that. And I think we have to step back from our sometimes natural tendency to fear those sorts of conversations because they might become challenging, and instead just view it through the lens of constant and continuous improvement. What are the ways in which we can improve diversity in the industry, within our own organisations and amongst our own community? Because at the end of the day, don't you want everybody, when they come to work, to feel that they can be authentic, that they can contribute to the best of their ability, and to feel as though they're understood? If you hit those markers, then you get really high performing staff, which is what every commercial business needs. So, yeah.
Completely agree. Though I feel like we're still on this journey of diversity, even if we're looking at the LGBTQ plus representation, and it's another topic I'm extremely passionate about. And I have a few friends in the industry that have focused, whether we're looking at, there is an initiative from podcasting and audio, Mosaic that is now talking about how do we create a better representation within podcasting and better opportunities for different diverse voices within podcasting. And of course, you have companies like Brand Advance that is also pushing things like representation in media in general. And obviously, Chris is someone I know quite well, and even not always well known. We just so I also produce a few documentaries. We just produced a documentary about modern art, and drag queen is part of that. It's really important for me to have proper representation in what we do, and how do we make a conscious decision regarding the artists we work with in order to create really correct picture of what reality really is, and not to have a really biased, this is a single voice that kind of matches our own relatively, like just accept that this story might develop differently, especially when you're doing documentaries. So I think it's across all of that, it's being conscious and making really conscious decisions regarding sometimes things that you're really uncomfortable, as you say, like you have a tendency to want to control, especially when you're making also a film, you want to control how the narrative will develop.
Yeah.
When you're trying to be also authentic, that kind of can clash between what you think you want to say and what the person you're working with, the person, like what they have to say about their own life. That was a really interesting lesson in general of how do you kind of balance those throughout. And I think that's true also for businesses as well. So I see the same kind of pattern. Really, I've learned a lot from both experiences and how they influence me in different environments.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that sort of juxtaposition between wanting to produce something that is, good quality, high value, something that's going to contribute positively, that's going to reflect a really good quality output. And then knowing that in order to get that result, one of the things you should do is try not to control things too hard. That juxtaposition is a very difficult place to sit. It's very difficult to feel comfortable in that juxtaposition. What I would say, one of the things that I've also learned in my career, having had the privilege of having worked in the public sector for a long time and then also in commercial businesses, is that is something, there's an awful lot of criticism we can level at public sector organisations, but that is something that the public sector has as part of their DNA. When you go to work for a public sector organisation that's responsible for delivering some really fundamental grassroots public services, everything from, let's just think for a second what local authorities do here in London, right? They do everything from collecting the bins and the recycling right through to accommodating children who have been taken away from their parents and are funneled into the care system. They've got responsibility for all of that and everything in between. So it's a really vast array of services, and their role is to make sure that they do that with the best value for money and ensuring that everybody is protected in that process, right? It's a very difficult thing to balance and weigh up all of those competing demands. And so you don't go and work for organisations like that and expect not to be criticised. You're criticised all the time, either by local residents who haven't had their bins collected, or by, people who have got extremely vulnerable lives or are dealing with people in very vulnerable situations, and their life might depend on some decisions that this organisation takes about where they can accommodate them, how much they can afford to, sort of contribute to their lives from a benefits point of view. These are very, very complex, difficult problems to solve, can be. And so your entire ethos is, I've got to flush out the criticisms. I've got to understand what's going wrong here before I can work out how to make this right. And so as part of their DNA, they're very good at going, okay, what are we doing a really shit job of here? What are we doing that's rubbish? How can we make sure that this is better? And so I always felt when I was working in those organisations that they were really good at tackling diversity, because they had no fear of saying, well, look at this. We've got we've got lots of diversity in the operational ranks in our organisations. So if you look at social workers, if you look at bin men, if you look at housing officers, if you look at teachers, you see loads of women, you see loads of people from different minority backgrounds, you see loads of gender diversity and diversity of thought and all sorts of contributions. Once you start to get up into the senior ranks, loads of white, middle class, middle-aged men. How is that possible? And they were asking those questions of themselves 20 years ago when I was working in those organisations. Those are questions that we're only just getting round to really truly reflecting on in the marketing and advertising industry. So we've been really slow to pick up the mantle on that. And what I can say from having been involved in those conversations 20 years ago, some of the sort of systems and processes that they put in place, or practical solutions that they put in place in those public sector organisations to address those inequalities, to address those imbalances, might seem on paper as though they're not necessarily fit for purpose. But over the course of many years, they have worked to a certain extent. They've changed people's mindsets. They've changed the way that people see those characteristics in individuals. They've changed the way services are constructed, the way services are delivered. There's still loads more to go, but they've made some really serious inroads, and we can learn from those organisations. And I think we are. And one of the ways that we're learning is by elevating the conversation, by taking it seriously at a senior leadership level, by making it part of the DNA of organisations, so baked into people's performance targets when they're recruiting people, when they're supporting their workforce, and connecting to wider communities. I've seen it happen before in other industries and organisations in the public sector. There's no reason why we can't do a lot better at this in the marketing and advertising industry. We have all the skills. We just need to professionalise it.
We just need to make it, like, I think it all depends on what the priorities. If you're focusing on money, like you're focused somewhere else, even if you think it's just, I think it's always, there is this saying in marketing, nobody was fired from nobody was fired from doing a campaign on Facebook or something like that, that. And I think that represents everything across board, is nobody was fired for making a conservative choice. So if someone was wary, if someone, like, it's the like if you're trying to push the envelope, is that you're, oh, like I'm taking over risk. I think that mindset of like nobody was smart for making a conservative choice is where we maybe need to change. If you are firing people for trying to push the envelope or trying something new or trying to do better, I think maybe we're doing something wrong for firing them, because you should fire the person who just make the same, maybe like on fire, but if someone is just making safe choices because they don't really care too much and they want to be safe, then this is not the people that you necessarily want to promote and to push. The people that are pushing the envelope, the people that do care, the people that are trying to do better is who you really want to keep, even if some of their decision will fail, because failure is part of progress.
And I think the two are not mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
You do. Let's be honest. The modern working world, when we're talking about marketing and advertising or any other commercial sector, everyone's job entails at least 50% of focusing on the bottom line and how am I contributing to revenue, how am I growing, and that could be anything from how am I designing and developing a product, how am I marketing that product, how am I helping my colleagues sell that product, how am I actually selling it, how am I actually building and growing revenue. All of those jobs, right, at least 50% of your role has got to be focused on that. Well, I would argue the other 50% has got to be focused on a whole bunch of other stuff that has been hitherto ignored, and they're not mutually exclusive. If you treat people with kindness and respect, if you value people for their own, for the wonderful diversity of characteristics that they might bring to their job and their role, whether that's neurodiversity, whether that's any other form of diversity, if you truly value people for those contributions and you treat them with respect, you treat them appropriately, you have the appropriate safeguards in place in your organisation to make sure that that can occur right throughout the organisation, and you pay attention to that all the way from the top down. So a leadership style and leadership behaviours that prioritise that, right through to making sure that people are challenged in the workplace on their performance if they're not paying attention to those sorts of outputs and outcomes, then I think you're still supporting the other 50% of the important part of your business. You know, you build and grow revenue and create great businesses from making sure you've got happy people who can achieve their best working in those businesses. And so you need to pay attention to both sides of that very same coin, and they're not mutually exclusive. They actually assist and support one another.
Agreed, and allow things to go wrong and allow things and embrace the fact that they will and all of that.
Exactly. Try things, they don't work, admit they don't work, move on to the next thing. You know, there's plenty of ways that you can cut this cake. You have to start with stopping feeling afraid of tackling the challenges. Like I said, get more of a public sector mindset in your head and think, I know we're not doing the right job here when it comes to this issue. Let's say, you know, a female leadership at a senior level within organisations. I know we're not doing the right things because I can see that we don't have enough women in these jobs. What can we do differently? There's nothing wrong with admitting that and then going after the challenge and seeing how you can do things differently. Try something, it doesn't work, try something else, see what happens. I just think it has come to a point where we need to be honest with ourselves about those challenges in our businesses and in the industry.
I tend to agree. And of course, what do you feel like this was the key lesson you've learned and you wish that you knew earlier? If there was one key lesson, what do you think that would have been?
Be more confident. I know confidence is a very individual thing. You know, it comes down to all sorts of things: life experience, personality, characteristics, cognitive abilities, diversity of thought, you know, you're just who you are in the world. I know all of that is very intrinsically linked to your confidence, but it links back to what I'd said, you know, at the very start of the podcast. Be more confident. The only thing that's limiting your beliefs of what you can do, really fundamentally, once you get the practical challenges out of the way, is yourself. And you know, you've nothing to lose from being confident. Be confident that you can do something a bit similar to what you've just said, Emma. Be confident you can do something, tackle it and realize, oh, actually, I'm not experienced enough at that yet. I need to learn some more, or I need to do something differently. Don't be afraid of failure. That's part of being more confident.
I agree so much, and I think it's more like I've entered so many, because I've changed roles and I change industries many times. I tend to, okay, I'm gonna just do something new, and it's going to be all right. And that there is something there that I think is more like the constantly. And I could the first few times I was terrified, and I still get scared a bit. And well, I still get scared, not a bit. I get scared. But there's something that I just go and like, you know what? I've done it before. I could do it again. Let's just give it a go. And it's that mindset and attitude of is yeah, and what's the worst shit? Like, what's the worst that can happen? I might fail. Cool. I'll pick myself up. I think
And you
that
learn something, right?
yeah,
Every
exactly.
failure teaches us something.
I think that mostly we learn from failure. And we learned a lot from, I think they say that plants always grow from the weakest, from where they're weakest, most vulnerable. And that's somehow true for people as well. We learn from those places of struggle and weakness and a lot of things. And I think those are opportunities for us for the most part. And so we, an organization, should not be afraid of it, because this is how we grow. This is what we do. And naturally, it can be very frustrating. It can be painful. It can be a whole range of things, but it's still important. I really appreciate everything. Any last thoughts that we have missed, that I have missed, that you would want to share?
I think we've covered a really fantastically wide range of questions and perspectives here that broadly covers the way that I think about issues of gender diversity in the industry, and also the little nuggets of, I think, important things that I've learned along the way. I think the only thing that I would add is my final note as well, when you asked earlier on about what's important in terms of having allies in the workplace, in your career path, etc. The other thing that I would say is there still needs to be, on every level of diversity, so let's just talk about gender balance for a minute, there still needs to be a sisterhood. There's a former Australian Prime Minister, a woman named Julia Gillard, who became very famous for delivering a speech in Parliament about misogyny, because she was being unfairly harassed and targeted by the leader of the opposition in a way that was so incredibly misogynistic and wasn't based on skills and abilities and specific things that she'd done in the role. He was being extremely, abusive with his language towards her. And she took the opportunity to have a speech in Parliament to take him down. It's famous. It's made it to social media years and years ago. And when interviewed about it many years later, because of course she had no idea that it was going to become such a famous pivotal moment in her lifetime as being Prime Minister, and also in her career as being a senior, a sort of a woman in a leadership role. When asked about it many years later, what was the most important thing about it, she said that while she was giving the speech, in her mind all she could think is, there is a special place in hell reserved for women who do not support women. And what we need to do is uphold sisterhood. And I think she's right about that. So what I don't want to do is create more segregation at all. Men are an extraordinarily important part of helping us sort out some gender balance. But women need to support women, and in every area of diversity, whatever characteristic we're talking about. That gets back to your point about community, Emma. We need to support one another. People that have got shared experience need to support other people that have got those similar experiences.
That's exactly why we named the podcast Women Lifting Women. And in the end of the day, I think we have to, because we've been told that there's only there's only room for a few women in the top. And that's kind of like, exactly. That is bullshit. We've been trying to told this, and I think that's a way of device, because media will devise us. There's this narrative we're trying to create this division between different people and also between women, I think, because we're not a minority.
No, we're not a minority, and we don't all have to be the same type of leaders, and we don't all have to behave in the same way. We can also have all the wonderful diversity that life offers us underneath within our gender, right? Like we don't all have to be the same. We don't all have to strive for the same jobs. We don't all have to strive for the same concepts of leadership. It's all rubbish. There's room for everyone at the top. There's room for all, versions of what it looks like to be a female leader. All we need to do is support one another and back each other.
I 1,000% agree, and I think that's a wonderful note to end this podcast. So thank you so much, Rachel Smith, for joining me today. I will again say, just really such a pleasure to have you. And as an ending note, I think for the full podcast, go to www.womenliftingwomen.io, or of course, check it out on Spotify, or I think YouTube as well. And thank you again. It's been such a pleasure.